for being able to come here tonight, Lord, and sing praises to you, to glorify your name, and look into your word as well. Would you please speak to us and bless the service this evening? But God, as well as we take up the offering, would you be honoured and glorified through it? And please bless it. We praise in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. See it for this one, 413. 413. Hi, James. 413. Just over the glory. 413. stay seated.
Maddie, would you like to come to the prayer cards? All right. Any prayer requests? Actually, I've got a letter here. What am I doing? I've got a letter from the Busters. So this letter is from the Busters for March this year. It says, greetings, Pastor and brethren. With closed borders, Tonga has had hoped that what was happening to the rest of the world would not happen here, but the inevitable has come. COVID-19 is here. We have been under lockdown for almost 5 weeks with limited movement. Last Saturday evening, the main island was placed on a hard lockdown, meaning only emergencies to hospitals and clinics are allowed, and in rural areas only one from a household gets to go to their bush block to collect food only and return. The island was given a 2-day warning to get supplies, and we are unsure if we can replenish during these 2 weeks. The islands of Awa and Haiapa are free of COVID and so are able to meet for services. I'm thankful Mark is on Awa to minister and hold services during my absence. A petition is being circulated around Awa to get the government to not allow any people to return to Awa till at least May, depending on what the situation will be at that time. Since the tsunami in January, there have been about 7 ferry trips to Awa taking supplies and also helicopters from HMAS Adelaide and Canberra. There was supposed to be a ferry last Saturday, but was cancelled due to the lockdown on the main island and also bad weather. Some supplies from donor countries have arrived for the rebuilding work to replace homes destroyed by the tsunami here on Tonga, Awa and Haiapa, and some smaller islands up north. These are very small dwellings, which are not much more than 4 walls and a roof, but at least it affords some shelter. In November and December last year, Sela and I went to Haiapa for 3 weeks on a survey trip to see the possibility of starting a new missions outreach. We spent our time on the main island of Lefuka and Foa, where most of the people live, handing out tracts and a number of Bibles and witnessing to people. Haiapa has a high percentage of Mormons. Accommodation is very scarce, with only one resort on Foa and a guest house on Lefuka that were open. Since tourism had fallen away from the beginning of the 2020, any accommodation places have closed or ceased to exist. We tried to find places to rent, but there is a shortage of houses, which makes accommodation very difficult. We've been praying about acquiring either a hybrid pop-top camper van or a caravan in Australia. This would need to be a fully self-contained with a bathroom, as there are no public facilities anywhere, either on Tonga or Haiapa. To give a bit more room, it would need to have an enclosed annex and also need its own power in the form of solar, with perhaps a small backup generator and cooking facilities. This type of accommodation could be used on the main island of Tonga in the outer villages. It can be transported via ferry up to Haiapa or even Vavao. We fully appreciate planning for something like this. It takes prayer for God's leading and timing. If anyone might know or has a van that is in very good condition, please get in touch with us. We very much appreciated the encouragement from many that were received through our contact and prayers since the volcano eruption and tsunami in January. Some prayer points he has here is our situation here on the main island for ministries of Awa, Bible Baptist Church, and Tonga Bible Baptist Church. Our health, both physically and spiritually, planning for missions outreach to Haiapa and salvation, Mark and Liz, Julie and Freddie, and just the people of Tonga in general. Thank you for your continued prayers and support for the Lord's work here in Tonga. Your co-labourers here in Tonga, Mark, Bob, Seela, Jacob, Mark, and Mayali, which is Mark's wife. Where there is no vision, the people perish, he says in Proverbs 29:18. So an update there from Brother Buster. Any prayer requests this evening? Brother Jude.
Health now is paramount.
Sorry?
Health.
Health?
Yep,
Yep.
that's right.
Yep. It's going around for sure.
And
will continue to, no doubt.
Christians being affected by flood on the other side of the state.
Yeah.
And the world, we still heard about Ukraine and Russia.
Yep. And there are Christians there in those two
Yep.
countries as well. And they're trying to serve God amidst troubling times, for sure. Gemma.
And pray for the salvations.
Yes. Pray for salvations, all these salvations. Yeah, working on different people, aren't we? Any other prayer requests this evening? Blue.
Monday night ministry and Ben and what was that lady's name?
Nia.
Mia. Ben and Mia who came on Monday night. Hello.
Yeah. Connor, can you just switch the audio from the live stream off these speakers? It's just yeah, Ben and Nia. So both were new on Monday night. Talking about sickness, Brother Jude. Sickness was there on Monday night. it was quite condensed. We all went in one car. Oh no, except for Jeff, the ghost who opens doors. But, yeah, he was there. But nonetheless, five people there, 2 new. It's good. Cornelius.
Ben's looking for a new job.
Ben's looking for a new job. He's put some applications in around the place, and so yeah, just pray for him. The Lord leads in a new direction. All the hotels are all starting to close down now with the COVID situation. So.
Pray for myself. I'm looking at being a mentor for Shalom House. A gentleman emailed me the other day saying I'll start off as a volunteer, then go into full time at the place. So just pray for me with Shalom House, getting foot in the door there, to do work there, and yeah, and
Good.
salvation of my wife, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Any other prayer requests? Yeah.
We've had a lot of construction workers at our house, and one of them in particular, her name's Rowie. I got a nice chat with her. I didn't share the gospel with her, but I invited her to church. She just lives on Keene Street, like where the deli is, but across from the deli, but on Keene Street. So she's very, very close. So anyway, I invited her to church, but I'm not sure if she'll come back to our house because they seem to be on quite a big rotation of who is on our house, and only a couple people have repeated so far. But anyway, so I've invited her to church. She knows where the church is. It's walking distance. And yeah, her name's Rowie. That's her nickname. I forgot her full name. Rowenda or something similar.
Right, yeah. Any other prayer requests this evening before we move on? Yeah, pray for our church services on Sunday for sure. Very good. All right. Take your Bibles, turn to Daniel chapter number 8. Daniel chapter number 8. I said last week that we are no longer in the Sunday school passage of Daniel, and we are definitely not in the Sunday school passage tonight. It's another dream, and I don't know if I took more time today studying or actually putting pictures up. I tried to put his picture, because without pictures, sometimes it's hard to exactly see what's going on and maybe picture what's going on. And so I have some pictures on the screen here this evening. I'm going to read through chapter number 8, take some feedback, and then I'll get into my notes here tonight. In fact, if you pull up the first picture, Connor, at least give you a sensory image to look at, and maybe if you have that sort of in your mind, you might help you for where we're going. Daniel chapter number 8, and verse number 1, follow along here. It says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first." So this is a follow-on. This is a continuation of sorts from chapter number 7. This follows on afterwards. "And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw that I was in Shushan, in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, and I was by the river Ulai. And then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. And I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beasts might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and became great. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great. And when he was strong, the great horn was broken, for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sacrifice and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall it be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days. Then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And it came to pass, when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So he came near where I stood. When he came, I was afraid and fell down upon my face, for he said unto me, Understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. And the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true. Wherefore shut up the vision, for it shall be for many days. And I, Daniel, fainted, and was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. Hopefully that's not how we end tonight. Hopefully that's just how we start. Any thoughts or comments before I get into my notes this evening? If you've read this chapter before, I'm telling you, most people when they read Daniel will read to Daniel chapter 6, sort of Daniel in the lion's den. And these chapters are often very rarely read, very rarely looked at. And you can probably think back in the time in your own Bible reading or in church and realize, man, this is probably a part of the Bible that we don't really go to very much. Some people go there all the time, but most people, this is outside of the bounds of normality, this particular chapter. And it's a deep chapter, lots going on, but I'm hoping to give you the basics of it, so at least get a grasping of it. I was going to say, if there's no thing tonight, and it wouldn't surprise me if there's not much at this beginning stage, we'll move on, but go ahead.
Just a broad overview. It's a picture of rising powers of Persian and Medo-Persians. Then you've got Alexander the Great with the four generals. So it's just sort of going through what was said in the previous chapter as well.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It's building on that for sure. And hopefully got a picture there to help that out. Were you going to add something there, Brother Jude? Yeah.
It's a very hard book. Yeah. We used to read like a Sunday school thing. But this one, it looks like a big piece of block. In the previous reading from chapter 1, I think you said this a while ago, that the dreams of the king is about the statue. Now, as we progress up to 8, the kingdoms is compared to, instead of a statue, is compared to the animals. And this is one now.
Yep.
Yeah. And we see the characteristic of the animals because leaders behave like animals and they have pride.
Yep.
What I notice, I go for the easy part. I will listen to the hard part from you. The thing that we observe, no matter how powerful is the leader, God always wins.
Yes.
That's the thing.
Yep.
That's the easy part for me.
Yeah. Yep. He's still in control.
He's still in control, that's right.
That's right. And that's definitely coming through. And the practical side of things is important. When it comes to prophecy and all this, sometimes you can just study prophecy without ever gleaning about God. Sometimes you can spend so much time about the nation of Israel and forget about the God of Israel. And that happens like things. And the practical side of it, that's why we put in our outline that we've been going through, is past, practical, and prophetic. And the practical side of this is very good. I'll give you just some practical side of things that we can learn. And if you just read prophecy just to get knowledge and never apply, all of Scripture is there to be applied and used in our daily life. All Scripture is profitable. We are supposed to exercise ourselves under godliness. We are supposed to do what the book says. There is application from Genesis all the way to Revelation. It says here, for application's sake, and just to give something practical from it this evening, is that Daniel learned that time was limited and determined. He learns that. He learns that there's 2,300 days for the abomination of desolation that's spoken of at this particular juncture. he learns in verse 23, in verse 19, at the time appointed the end shall be. That out of all of the plans that are going on, God has limited a day. Days are limited. They are. Think of Hebrews 7. When I think of this truth, it says again, he limiteth a certain day, saying in David, today, after so long a time, it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts. There is a day for salvation. There is a day to soften our hearts. There is a time and a moment. And God gives a certain space of time for man to repent, for man to be right with him, and there is a time where it will be cut off. He says in Hebrews 3, while it is today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts, as in the day of provocation. In 2 Corinthians 6:2, he says, for he saith, I have heard thee in a time accepted, and in a day of salvation have I succored thee. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. There is a time. There's a moment. There's a period of time that God allows for certain works to take place. Job 7:1 says this, is there not an appointed time to man upon the earth? Even your life has been appointed by God, the span and the length of time that you will exist. And man, just generally speaking, God has given man 70 years upon this earth, and if by strength 80, and it might fluctuate just a little bit beyond that or a little bit before that, but it's not very long. God's appointed a time that man, you and I are going to be born, we're going to live, we're going to die. We have a chance and a moment to be right with God and to walk with him and to serve him. And all of these things have already been appointed by God. And they're good thoughts to have, to realize God is in control. God has given these windows, and windows for good and windows for bad. Even those have been limited by God, and he limits the desolation that takes place by this little horn that we will get to here in just a moment. In the past, very quickly, the next picture if you could, just pull up these picture. This is, again, so we have this vision can be summed up with these two animals. One is the ram with the two horns, and one is the he-goat. The he-goat comes along and defeats the ram. The ram is, we love it when the Bible interprets itself. And again, these prophecies from Daniel, it's like prophecy. It's like the beginning of prophecy. It's like when you're trying to ride a bike, you have the trainer wheels on, and and God puts the trainer wheels on in these chapters of Daniel, and he pushes us in the direction that he wants us to go, and then he slowly takes the trainer wheels off, but we're supposed to keep going in the direction that he has pointed us with these. And he tells us, here's some of the training wheels to help us keep us going on the straight direction here. He tells us the interpretation of this is that it's the Medes and the Persians. Now the horns represent authority. They're kings. So he says one horn is bigger than the other horn, and the bigger horn came up afterwards. Now if you know the Medes and the Persians, they were joined. Two kingdoms, two kings that came together to form ultimately the Persian Empire. The Medes were older than the Persians, but Cyrus married the king of the Medes' daughter and joined the kingdoms together, and he ultimately became a more powerful king than the Medes, and the Persian Empire prospered under him, and then Xerxes and the rest that came after him. And then the he-goat, we learn, it's the king of Greece. It's Alexander the Great. It says specifically in verse 21, the rough goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn that between his eyes is the first king. Now the first great king that the kingdom started with is Alexander the Great. He was swift and fast, and so we are told it in verse 20 and 21, the interpretation of it, that this is the Medes and the Persians and the Grecians. And we're told it's the first king of the Grecians. We know it's Alexander the Great. Swiftness and his speed with which Alexander the Great conquered the world. We can read the history books, compare them, and they match up just fine. And we also learn this, that he moves with choler. There's anger in how he moves. There's some anger towards the Persians. And if you know history, the Persians tried to conquer the Greeks a few times as they expanded out. And every time they were defeated, 3 separate times they were defeated. And so there must have been some animosity there. And this time when Alexander the Great comes, he comes with choler and he comes with hatred and zeal to defeat the Persians and set up his kingdom and defeats those ones. Again, this flows on. I'll very quickly give a rundown from the last few chapters. If you go to the next one, Chapter number 2, if you remember, chapter number 2 has the image of gold. It tells us this, that there's going to be these kingdoms of men's kingdoms that will rise up. The Babylonian kingdom, the Neo-Babylonians. Then you have, from chapter 2, he says that the silver represents the Medes and the Persians. Then you have the brass and the bell, which represents the Grecian Empire. Then you have iron, which the ones that came after the Greeks were the Roman Empire. Then it talks about part iron and part clay. Part strong, part weak. These 10 toes that are mentioned. And then there's a rock that comes down and breaks it and sets up the kingdom. So ultimately, these kingdoms of men are broken by Jesus Christ, who sets up his kingdom. So it's talking about, that's laid out for us in chapter number 2. Then we had last week chapter number 7. And chapter number 7 repeats it, but from a different perspective. And we looked at the chiastic nature from chapter 2, where there's the mirrored image, those chapters from 2 to 8, 2 to 7. And you have the lion, the winged lion, which represents Babylon. Then you have the bear with the 3 ribs in its mouth, which represents the Medes and the Persians. You then have the leopard with the 4 heads and the swiftness of a leopard and the speed with which Alexander conquered the world as the Grecians. And then you have this hideous beast with all these 10 horns that are there. So you have them paralleling the same image. It's like the gold statue and the silver is Nebuchadnezzar's dream. It's how man views the kingdoms of the world. They view them in such splendor and such glory and view them as precious metals. God looks at the kingdoms of the world and he looks at the kings of this world and he looks at them as beasts. And he refers to them as beasts, as just animals that are pursuing after their own pride and lust and the things of this world. And the lion and the bear and the leopard and this hideous beast. He says they're just beasts. And when they're referring to beasts, they're not just mythological creatures. He's referring, they are representations of men who are kings. And then the 10 horns, and out of those 10 horns, there is a horn that comes out. So those 10 horns also marry up and represent the 10 toes. 10 king, the horns are powers. So it's symbolic in nature. Well, now you come over to chapter number 8, and now you have more beasts, more animals. And you have a he-goat, and you have the he-goat, and you have the ram. The ram, we're told, it represents the Medes and the Persians. And the he-goat represents the Grecian Empire, the Greeks. So there's a consistent flow through the book of Daniel. You don't have to go there and try and work out, is this talking about America? Is this talking about England? Is this talking about Russia? Is this what? No, it tells us what it's talking about, and there's a clear flow through the book of Daniel with what he's saying. So you have these 2 animals. Go to the next one if we could. Now, this is the dream, and I'll put it in picture form. Hopefully this helps you out and speeds us up. So that little dot there on that image is Shushan, Susa. If you Google Susa, is where you'll find it. Shushan in the Bible, Susa in modern day Iran, which is Persia, which is the Elamites, the land of Elam. So this is where Daniel was. Now, whether he was there physically or that's where he realized he was in his dream, it's a little bit of conjecture as to that, but he's at Shushan, either physically or in the vision, and there's that river Ulai, and out of that river comes these 2 beasts. The first one, the ram, and then the second one, the he-goat. The ram pushes, and it says this, that the ram comes along, and that ram had 2 horns, which we said were the 2 kings. One was the Medes, one was the Persians. The Persian was bigger, horn, more authority, more power, and it pushed westward. It pushed westward and then northward and southward. That's how the Persian Empire came about. When God said this to Daniel, they weren't even on the scene yet. And God is saying, this is what's going to happen. They are going to push westward. And they are going to, so they came from Elam, they came from Iran, and they came over and defeated the Assyrians, and they defeated the Babylonians, and they defeated the Assyrians, and then they defeated the Egyptians, and they pushed out and expanded their empire and became great. That's what it says. It became great. But at the end of their kingdom, and they tried pushing as well, even further on, they tried pushing and pushing, but weren't able to do that against the Greeks. They expanded their empire and they lasted for a period of time. And then we are told that this next he-goat comes on the scene with the 1 horn, and he lays a death blow on the ram with the 2 horns. And the he-goat came from the west. Now, if you know a map, it's exactly what takes place. He comes from the west and comes along, and he had a notable horn, and he came to the ram, and he moved with choler against him. There was some hatred, there was some venom in his spirit towards him. And there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. And the ram, the Grecians, the Persians were defeated by Alexander the Great. That's what the prophecy is. But then we zoom in a little bit, and we're told this, that out of the head of the ram, of that he-goat, his horn is broken off, and then there are 4 horns that take its place. Now, again, we go back to history and we can look at these things. The Grecian Empire, when Alexander the Great died at the ripe old age of 31, 32, 33, very young, conquered the world in his 20s, literally defeated kingdoms, conquered the world. Really interesting story out of Josephus. Take a slight detour for just a moment, but Josephus, the historian of the Jews, said when Alexander the Great was conquering the world with such rapidity and such swiftness, and he was defeating these cities and nations, he came to Jerusalem. And when he came to Jerusalem, he was met with the priests and he was met with the leaders of the city and said, basically, we've been expecting you. And he was greatly surprised that they said that they were expecting him, and they went and showed him the book of Daniel, so Josephus says, and he says that they showed him the book of Daniel and said, you are prophesied, God has said that you will conquer the world. And so he never defeated or destroyed or attacked Jerusalem. He actually had great regard, he being a heathen king and never really bowing to the God, but he had respect for the Jews, never destroyed Jerusalem, kept on going and conquered the rest of the world, and had respect there for the Jews and for the Jews' God, and that's out of Josephus. But then after he dies in Babylon at 32, 33 years of age, the generals, there's more than 4 generals, but there was multiple generals, and basically, so legend has it, there's a bit of conjecture about exactly how this took place, but some said when he was on his deathbed, who do you want us to give the kingdom to? And so some records say he says, to the strongest. Whoever is the strongest can take it. So the generals fought, and there was battles between the generals, and there was 8 or 9 or so of them. But 4 ultimately became successful. One was Cassander, and he took that section, and Lysimachus, and Seleucus, and Ptolemy down there in Egypt. And it says here that these 4 kings that rise up when the horn is broken off, it says in verse number 8, so you can follow along in your Bible with the picture, verse number 8, it says that when he was strong, the great horn was broken. So Alexander the Great, in his zenith, died. His horn was broken. And then it says, and it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. Now the 4 winds of heaven, meaning north, east, south, and west. And that's what they sort of came up as. And you look at that, where those kingdoms were and where those Grecian generals took their kingdom, you'll see north, east, south, and west. But the green one, it says here, that out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. Now the pleasant land has to do with Israel. That's the pleasant land. This is what God has given Daniel a vision of that. And so here we know history. Now where the green is, Seleucus and Ptolemy, there was battles between those generals as well for who's going to be the most powerful amongst them. If you go to the next screen, if you could. A man by the name of Antiochus, I can't remember the other way of pronouncing his name. There's 2 ways to pronounce his name, but Antiochus Epiphanes. Epiphanes means the appearing of God. That's what he gave himself that title. Just a little bit of hubris in that man. But he said he gave himself that title, the appearing of God, God in the flesh, basically, saying, I'm God. But Antiochus, and he was a Seleucid, from the Seleucid part of the Greece Empire, and he became king, and he became very powerful, and he came down and he fought against Ptolemy and all these sort of things. But as he tries to push his empire south, he was strong from the east, and he tries to push it south and towards the pleasant land. As he's going towards Ptolemy, and he's trying to defeat the other general, Ptolemy, guess who now becomes in the crosshairs? Well, that's where he's now. Israel is in the crosshairs now of a king that has great, he's not necessarily singling out Israel, but because he is pushing southward and he's trying to expand it, now Israel is in the crosshairs. And so he goes there, and this is ultimately, he makes a peace accord with them for a little bit, and then some things happen. We've got way too much to talk about to do justice tonight, but let's just say that it was a peace accord, there was some breaking of it, but when he came back with fury against them, and he says, and he was angry with them and breaks the peace accord that he had with them when he came back from Egypt, because of their uprisings and their rebellion against his rule. And he comes back and just destroys the city again. And he destroys the nice houses and the nice buildings, and he kills many people in the city of Jerusalem, and history records this. And it's the Maccabees. If you know 1st and 2nd Maccabees from the War of the Maccabees, if you know anything about that time of Jewish history, that falls in this particular time. And why it's worth our attention when he says that there's a horn, he's going to magnify himself, even to the prince of the host. It says here in this passage here, verse 10, that it waxed great. This little horn, this Antiochus is what I believe he's saying, because this horn comes out of this kingdom. And it says it cast down, it says it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast some down to the host, and the stars to the ground, and stamped upon it. And he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. I mean, if you name yourself Epiphanes, you're gonna magnify yourself pretty high if you're going to say that you're the appearance of God. He magnifies himself even to the prince of the host. And by him, the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Antiochus, when he got in there, when he came back with anger against the Jews, he comes back and he basically outlaws Jewish religion. And he starts to implement Hellenistic culture. That's Greek culture. So in the book of Acts, it says that there was strife in the daily administration because the Grecians felt like their widows were being neglected because of the Hebrews. The Grecians there, that word is in the Greek is Hellenist. They are Hellenistics. So to be Hellenistic means to be Greek, and Greek culture and Greek speaking. That's why the New Testament is written in Greek, because they were the Greek Empire trying to Hellenize the known world. In Ptolemy's world down in Egypt, you may have heard of one of the great wonders of the ancient world, the Library of Alexandria, because what they tried to do is take all the books that are out there in the world, and they wanted to make a library, turn it all into Greek, translate the great books all around the place, and translate it into Greek, and then house the great books of the world wherever they were in the kingdom, and keep them in a library at Alexandria in Egypt. In so doing, they translated the Jewish scriptures in Hebrew, they translated them into Greek for the library there, known as the Septuagint, with the 72 that translated it. That's where they come from, but it's that same idea of the Hellenizing, trying to turn things to Greek, speak Greek, live Greek, act Greek, and worship Greek. So when he came in, he destroys. He says, no, you're not worshipping the Most High. You're not worshipping your God anymore. You're not circumcising your children anymore. And he goes into the temple there at Jerusalem, and he sets up an altar. He sets up an idol to Zeus, the Greek god. He sets up him, or Jupiter, sets him up. And then he sacrifices a pig on the altar and desecrates the temple, and says, you cannot offer to your God, you must worship and you must sacrifice to the Greek gods. Now there were Jewish people who started to succumb, and the story says that Matthias, Maccabeus, when he was the high priest, there was one of the Jews went to sacrifice, like Antiochus said, to sacrifice to the Greek gods, and as soon as he stepped out to sacrifice, he took a knife or took a sword and killed that Jew and says, no, we are not sacrificing. That is not going to happen while I'm the high priest. And he said that he killed them, and it started a revolt that lasted for many years, and the Maccabean revolt, where they ultimately ended up defeating Antiochus. And they cleansed the temple because of what took place. When he cleansed the temple, it's what is now known as Hanukkah. So when they have the Jewish feast of Hanukkah, It's about them purifying the temple all the way back to what Antiochus did at the temple time. They purified it and cleansed it and sanctified it again and put it back for the Most High God. When Jesus in the book of John goes to Jerusalem at the Feast of Dedication, it's Hanukkah. It's in December. He says he goes up there when it's winter. Hanukkah is right around just before Christmas time. It fluctuates between the end of November to the beginning of December. It's Hanukkah has to do with this time where where I think it was Judas Maccabeus that finally defeated them, and they dedicated the temple, rededicated the temple. In all of that, get this. He mentions this in verse number 13. Verse 13 says this: "Then I heard one saint speaking unto another saint, said unto the certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation?" This is one of the key points, teachings out of the book of Daniel. In fact, Jesus makes mention of this teaching when he is teaching when he is alive, and he talks about the abomination of desolation. Now, in my mind, for years and years and years, I always thought it was the abomination of desecration. It's not the abomination of desecration that something is desecrated. It's the abomination of desolation. It means it's desolate. It means it's not allowed. We're going to deal with this a little bit more in chapter number 9 about the desolation of Jerusalem, where it's outlawed, where it's broken, it's a wasteland. And so we have this abomination of desolation. Basically, it's not allowed to worship the Most High God. And there was a time and a period where the worship of the Most High God was not allowed. That's the abomination of desolation. And it says that the hosts of heaven, oh man, got so much time, I've got to quit here. But the hosts of heaven, let me give you this, talks about the stars. I think this about the stars, and about what's mentioned here with the stars, is this. Lamentations 12:1 says, "How hath the Lord covered the daughter of Zion with a cloud in his anger, and cast down from heaven unto the earth the beauty of Israel." That's what it does in Lamentations when it was destroyed. The imagery that is used by the writer Jeremiah in the book of Lamentations when he looks at the destruction of Jerusalem, he says, "How has, and cast down from heaven unto the earth the beauty of Israel." Now, if you were to go to Genesis 26 verse 4, this is what God says to Abraham, or to Jacob, which one, I can't remember now. "And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven." He's talking about Israel when it talks about the stars in this context. And then even when they're destructed, they were cast down from heaven and their beauty was cast down. It's talking about Israel. In Genesis 37 verse 9, if you know this, Joseph had a dream. What did he dream? That his father and his mother were what? And they bowed down. The sun and the moon, and then his 11 brothers were what? Stars. They were stars. So there is a biblical pattern that Israel and the nation of Israel are referred to as stars. In Revelation chapter 12 and verse 1, "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun." That woman is who? If you know, it pictures Israel. And that woman brings forth a son, and that son is Jesus. And he is crowned, and she is crowned upon her head with 12 stars. It has to do with the 12 tribes of Israel. They are referred to as stars. So when he comes into the city of Jerusalem and he casts down the host of heaven, it's that Israel is supposed to be a separated people unto God, that they are not of this world. They are separated from this world, sort of pictured to be righteousness and the lights of heaven upon this earth in a dark world at night time, which is sort of what stars are meant to do. They're meant to shine light in a dark world. Is what we're supposed to do. If you were to read the book of Daniel towards the end, and it says, "And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever." So there is a pattern that the stars can refer to Israel and to the righteous. Jesus said that then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. There are references in the Bible to Christians and to Israel meaning the stars, and Israel being the stars in that sense. Angels are also referred to as stars at some places as well. But in this case, I believe the host of heaven has to do with the stars, has to do with the nation of Israel. And he says he's going to cast them down and tread them underfoot, and they're bringing those that come down to this earth in the sense of that they live for the things of this world and they sacrifice to the gods of this world, and they leave who they should be worshipping, the Most High God, and there are some who shall be brought down and trodden underfoot by this little horn. I must go on. I must quit with this. So he goes through, and he says in verse number 24, verse number 23, in the latter time of their kingdom, the kingdom of the Grecians, is when these things, he said, will take place. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, verse 24, and he shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper and practice and destroy the mighty and the holy people. It's a prophecy around Israel, but, and I don't have time because we've already gone past all this, but it also pictures to the Antichrist, the little horn that comes up. That we'll see this, that from chapter 7 there's a little horn that comes up and it magnifies himself to the host of heaven, magnifies himself in the place of God. It's the same thing happening again. So this little horn and the little horn of chapter 7, though different, picture and point us on to when this will happen again. Well, one will magnify himself and he will have the abomination of desolation. It is illegal. It is not allowed to worship the God of heaven. And he will seek to bring down and wage war against the saints. It's the same thing. It's pointing on what's happened in the past will happen again. As Solomon says, there's no new thing under the sun. It's the same thing that happens again and again. Every nation, every king that comes along wants to be the next world-dominating power. And in his beastly way, he wants to set himself up as God. It's the same thing repeated. And there's more here, but we got to quit for the sake of time because you guys have got to go to work in the morning. It's good stuff, and there's a lot of information there tonight. I'm going to quit there. Because we've gone past a little bit of time, let's have a couple of men pray, and we'll pray collectively as a church tonight.